Constitution Day 2021 here at the Alpharetta campus. This observance is held every year on or near September 17th in every school, college throughout the United States as required by federal law. Mr. Adam Stone, Associate Chair of the Department of Social Sciences here at Alpharetta, has arranged a great speaker, Ms. Lauren Hanson-Figeroa, doctoral student at the Atlanta campus of Georgia State University, to comment on redistricting in Georgia, an issue on which the U.S. Constitution has a bearing. The Constitution is the foundation of the governmental system of the United States. It is the embodiment of our country's commitment to the rule of law. This commitment to the rule of law unites us. It is our best assurance of security and domestic peace. And that is why the annual commemoration of the signing of the Constitution, 17th of September, 1787, is so important. So I extend my thanks to all of you and to our feature speaking for coming today. So.
Thank you, Dean Brianna. As you've been told, my name's Adam Stone, and I'm the Associate Chair for Social Sciences on this campus. I want to thank all of you for showing up. I know a number of you have to sign. When we're done, probably less than an hour, I'll have you guys sign on the way out. I'll put out the sheet and light. Hopefully it won't cause too much of a traffic jam. First, I'm going to do some thank yous. I'd like to thank, right here, our person manning the web feed, JP Peters, who is head of the Office of Student Civic Engagement at the university. And JP, I want to thank you for organizing Constitution Week university-wide and for being here today. I also want to thank April Williams, the lead for what is now called Student Life, among other things, and she's provided some refreshments that are out there for when this is over. I want to also thank the Honors College, the dean who couldn't be here, Dr. Lori Goodling, for sponsoring this. What's important about Constitution Day is to remember that the Constitution is a living document. It doesn't say anywhere in the Constitution about redistricting or this evil word, which Professor Hanson-Figeroa will tell us about gerrymandering. The Constitution simply says for the House of Representatives, the People's Branch, that the seats shall be apportioned based on population. That's why you did the census last year. And what happens after that is kind of a long process, but it's very, very important, especially here in Georgia, which has become a competitive state. As a competitive political state, how you slice up your districts matters. It has a tremendous amount of effect in elections and politics and governance. Those of you who know me know that I wear bow ties. This one today says, "We the people." That's the first three words of the Constitution. We the people. We can't all go up to Washington and govern. We have to pick others to govern for us. As we do that, we generally draw legislative districts to elect our people who represent us in Congress. Also, in different world is the state legislature, but we're talking mostly about Congress here and the Constitution. So how we draw those districts, once again, has a bearing. It's how we govern ourselves. Remember, we, the people, govern. I'd like to introduce more formally our guest speaker. Lauren Hanson-Figeroa is a doctoral student in political science at our Atlanta campus. She received her bachelor's degree in political science, yes, and women's studies from Agnes Scott in 2016. In political science, as a doctoral student, her most recent project is titled "Small Hands with Big Consequences: Masculinity and Emasculation as Rhetorical Tools in the 2016 Republican Primary Debates." That is where Donald Trump became this huge public political figure. And those debates and the language used is extremely important. And when many of you may see that in your poli-sci class, I burden my students. And she's presented recently at the Southern Political Science Association, their annual meeting in 2020. Her research interests include gender, performance, identity, campaigns, and elections. So this is something that Professor, I'll call her that, Hanson-Figeroa is an expert in. It's what goes on in campaigns and elections, and now we'll take a slice of that in redistricting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was such a lovely introduction. How y'all doing? Happy Constitution Day. Okay, yes, we can take 21, Constitution. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go over those constitutional foundations of federal and state level responsibilities. We'll talk a little bit about censuses, apportionment, redistricting, what redistricting looks like in Georgia. Gerrymandering might be a dirty word, but we're going to get more comfortable with it today. Some different examples of judicial review and how that's altered redistricting over time. And then a proposal for redistricting Georgia. Okay, so Article 1, Section 2, as Adam noted, we talk about apportionment and needing a census for that apportionment, right? Okay, the census, massively important. Did you guys fill it out? Hopefully, I hope your heads of house did. It's vital, so it helps us decide where to put money. It helps guide critical questions about, businesses, universities, nonprofits, and we do this every 10 years. So let's see, in terms of counting the census, this is an example. So you think of something like Montana, that's probably relatively easy to count, but something like Washington, the topographical constraints are incredibly challenging. More specifically in Puget Sound. Really hard to get there. And why does that matter? Representation, right? We want to make sure that everyone is adequately represented, even if they are in somewhere that's a little bit more remote. Seattle as well has such a difficult time. And so we'll get into it later, but the different rules and regulations around redistricting makes things like Mercer Island really difficult. Okay, so we have the census, and from the census, we deal with apportionment. So it's the first part of the process, right after the census, and we report that to Congress. George Washington suggested that one representative should be held for every 30,000 citizens. If we were to do that now, we would have, I think, over 100,000 members of the House. So we currently just have 435, and that hasn't changed following the 1910 census. So these were the projections. And this is what actually happened. So we see Florida's growing and has been growing consistently. Texas is growing. We've stayed the same. Some of the other more tumultuous states like Pennsylvania, Michigan have lost one. So each state has to then redistrict itself to accommodate a gain or loss of that representation based on their increase or decrease in population. The Constitution also lets us know that each state is guaranteed at least one representative. So now we know how many representatives each state gets, but we're not sure how do we elect them. So Article 1, Section 4 lets us know that it is the state legislature's requirement. So redrawing the boundaries of districts within each state based on those census results. We follow the process of reapportionment based on those gains and losses of population. And congressional district lines are also used for things like school districts, county lines. So we have a lot of constraints that a given state has on how they can make those districts. So the Voting Rights Act from 1965 was designed to combat tactics denying minorities the right to effective votes, including redistricting. So Section 2 specifically prohibits voting practices or procedures that discriminate on the basis of race, color, or membership in one of the language minority groups. So respecting communities of interest, for example, a Native American reservation ideally won't be split in the middle by a congressional district. Contiguity refers to the principle that all areas within a district should be physically adjacent, so one district should be touching. And compactness refers to the general principle that the constituents within a district should live as near to one another as practicable. So to get a little bit more specific, for Georgia, our state legislature is responsible. It requires a simple majority in both chambers with the opportunity to be vetoed by our governor. So in 2011, our House Redistricting Committee suggested to prohibit multi-member districts, which means that in Georgia, we are allowed to only send one representative from one district, to consider existing county and precinct boundaries, the compactness, and communities of interest. So we have some rules, but it also feels like there might be some space to justifiably break them a little bit. A little bit of space for self-interest. Okay, so gerrymandering is to manipulate the boundaries of an electoral constituency to favor one party or class. Does anyone know this story? Governor Gary? Kind of fun. Okay, so Governor Gary was the governor of Massachusetts, and his administration enacted a law in 1812 that defined new state senatorial districts to favor the Democratic Republican Party over the Federalist Party. The Democratic Republican Party was Gary's party. So everyone was a little fussy, and the newspaper editors combined his name with salamander, which is what they thought the district kind of resembled the political cartoon from the 19th century, but it still makes them laugh. Okay, so here's an example from Fair District, Georgia. Anyone from Lawrenceville? Okay, this is you. So you got a little split up after 2011. So before 2010, we had one state house district, and after we had 6. So I do want to note that I don't believe that this is exclusively one party versus another's problem. So Andrew Young, Newt Gingrich, and John Barrow were all purposely drawn out of their districts during their respective bids for Congress. So all 3 of them. In 2015, Republican legislators changed district lines for House 105 and 111 to protect 2 Republican representatives who had just barely won re-election the year before. And we tried to do the same thing in 2017 and 2019, but public comment was just overwhelming. Here's another one, Waycross in Ware County. Interesting. So we can see some of the topographical. So we see like our border, perhaps a mountain range. Makes relative sense. And then to split into 4, a little confusing. So let's talk about why we do that. All right, this is a tactic in gerrymandering called cracking. Cracking involves spreading voters of a particular type among many districts in order to deny them a sufficiently large voting block in any particular district. An example would be to split the voters in an urban area among several districts wherein the majority of voters are suburban, on the presumption that the 2 groups would vote differently, and the suburban voters would be far more likely to get their way in elections. So even though intuitively the crack district might look right, if we look at the color of the bricks, we can see that that's ineffective or unequal. Okay. This is an example. State, cities that had been cracked before 2011 and cities that had been cracked in 2011 during the redistricting. And cracking again involves spreading voters of a particular type among many districts in order to deny them a sufficiently large voting block. So we're breaking up a lot of voting blocks here. Another method often used is packing. Packing is to concentrate as many voters of one type into a single electoral district to reduce their influence in other districts. Some cases, this may be done to obtain representation for a community of common interest. So things like creating majority-minority district. Do we know what that means? A majority-minority district. So instead of whites being the majority in a district, it would be someone from a minority who runs that district. So it would be a majority Hispanic, majority Asian. So it might be in favor of attempting to obtain a majority minority district rather than to dilute that interest over several districts to the point that it's ineffective and a voting block isn't possible. So packing is more likely to be used for partisan advantage when the party controlling the districting process has a statewide minority. By forfeiting a few districts packed with the opposition, cracking can be used in forming the remaining districts. Cracking and packing both produce votes that are wasted in the sense that they don't contribute to any individual candidate victory. So in the case of cracking, all votes cast for the losing candidate are totally wasted. And in the case of packing, all votes cast for the winning candidate above the 50% plus one threshold needed for victory are wasted. Okay, so these days, it used to be straight up pen and pencil canvassing in order to redistrict. Nowadays, you can use myriad software. Maptitude is very cool. But it helps create such specific district lines, it's almost scary. So these software services can take into consideration things like education, income, race, how many times people have voted in past elections, campaign donations, all of those kinds of things with an astonishing degree of precision. And it greatly increases efficacy of gerrymandering and reducing the chance of actually making a competitive district. Okay, so some effects of gerrymandering. The most immediate and obvious effect is for elections to become less competitive in all districts, but especially packed ones. As electoral margins of victory become significantly greater and politicians have increasingly safe seats, the incentive for a meaningful campaign is reduced to almost nothing. So for the same reason, voter turnout is likely to be adversely affected as well, because the chance of feeling like you're influencing an electoral result is reduced quite a bit. And because of that, political campaigns are way less likely to spend money on encouraging voter turnout. So the effect of gerrymandering on incumbents is particularly focused, as incumbents are far more likely to be reelected under conditions of gerrymandering. For example, in 2002, only 4 challengers were able to defeat incumbents and members of Congress. Wild numbers. So as the winners of elections are increasingly determined by who is drawing the districts rather than preferences of voters, it's getting a little sketchy. Congress is picking constituents instead of the other way around. And if neither party can gain seats, incumbents may secure the status quo. For example, in California, no state or federal legislative office changed party in the 2004 election. Very surprising. Let's get to some judicial review. So the early 60s was the start of the redistricting revolution. So in this case, Baker v. Carr, the Supreme Court forced the Tennessee legislature to reapportion itself based on the basis of population. The case ended traditional overrepresentation of rural areas in the legislature and established that the court can intervene in apportionment cases. The court ruled that every citizen's vote should carry equal weight, regardless of the geographical location. Kind of a dorky political cartoon, but very apt. You don't find a lot that are so on the nose, appropriate. Reynolds v. Sims. So this was built on Baker, and it requires virtually every state legislature to be reapportioned, ultimately causing political power in most states to shift from rural to urban areas. And in this opinion, the justices said no less than substantially equal state legislative representation is demanded for all citizens, noting that the right to direct representation was a bedrock of the political system The court also held that both houses of bicameral state legislatures had to be apportioned on population. States were required to show an honest and good faith effort to construct districts as nearly of equal population as practicable. Shaw v. Reno. This one was a little trickier. So North Carolina had some very sketchily shaped districts. And although this North Carolina reapportionment plan was racially neutral on its face, the district shape was bizarre enough to suggest that it implied an effort to separate voters into different districts based on race. The unusual district, while it might be created for noble reasons, seemed to exceed what was reasonably necessary to avoid racial imbalances. So racial gerrymandering is decidedly illegal based on what we've seen in those cases. Not allowed to do that. Partisan gerrymandering, though, is not illegal. Just a few years ago, in 2019, the Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 that federal courts have no power over partisan gerrymandering. In the majority opinion, Justice Roberts said that executive partisanship in districting leads to results that reasonably seem unjust. However, he also wrote, "We conclude that partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the reach of the federal courts." So, kind of a big goose egg there. And prison gerrymandering. So counting people who are being held in prison negatively affects the democratic process, funding, and it provides just an overall distorted picture of that area and that state. Georgia, we count prisoners as residents of their given area, but as we know, prisoners are unable to participate in society and by extension, the democratic process. Okay. Here's kind of a wild and crazy example. You all see those lines? You can see the blue for sure. So by combining Black enclaves of several cities, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, and Charlotte, the 12th district has the second highest minority population of any of the state's districts. However, it has far fewer minorities than it was first created in '92. The original district was claimed political pornography by the Wall Street Journal, and it was struck down in '96, at which point you can see it got a little wider and a little shorter, but it still retained essentially just a ridiculous, like, lumpy snake appearance. It's been redrawn 5 times since '93. And this newest outline from 2016 was redrawn after a federal court ruled that the lines have been drawn to concentrate Black voters and limit their influence. To our own misshapen district. Okay, so the 11 on the right is not what the 11 looks like now. Interesting story. So Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act specified that states in the South, like Georgia, who had literacy tests or other prerequisites to registering to vote, and in which less than half of the voting age population had registered or voted in the '64 presidential election, has to get federal approval before they're redistricting. So the Supreme Court ruled that the rightmost 11th district was unconstitutional because its borders were drawn with explicitly racial motives. So the 11th district was created under orders from the Justice Department in accordance with the Voting Rights Act, stipulates that a voting population has adequate opportunity to effectively represent its interests at the federal, state, and local level. So stretching 260 miles from Atlanta to Savannah, connecting areas of predominantly Black voters along the way. It's huge. Court previously ruled that districts with bizarre shapes are legally dubious, but in this case, it was noted that the shape was not the only problem with the district. The motivation chosen behind it is also legally significant. So keeping in mind all of the things that we have to consider when we're thinking about drawing district lines. It seems really challenging, honestly. It seems challenging to take topographical things into account and to make sure we're following federal guidelines, respecting those communities of interest. It's a lot. I can understand that it seems overwhelming, in addition to the fact that these are district lines that we've been working on for centuries. But I'm curious, doing some just like research, how could we do Georgia without those lines? And I came across this fair voting plan that I thought was very interesting. So as we know, the 2020 census happened, and lawmakers in Georgia recently passed a congressional redistricting plan as required by the Constitution. So fairvote.org has produced this super district plan, and it's designed for elections with a fair voting system. So fair voting systems are constitutionally permissible, but it's a form of proportional representation. And by allowing voters to participate in what will almost always be a meaningful election, it's a far better way to achieve public interest objectives than a winner-take-all election. So typically, right now, we have requirements of 50% plus one in order to win a seat. Fair Vote is arguing that we do away with that. So rather than use a winner-take-all system, which accentuates the effects of redistricting and encourages partisanship, Fair Vote argues that the winner-take-all gerrymandered district should form a multi-member constituency called a super district. So Congress would need to repeal a 1967 law that mandates single-member districts. But state and city governments often have the power to adopt fair voting systems under their current laws. So right now we have 14 congressional districts in Georgia. The Fair Vote proposal creates 4 super districts. So we have 3 3-seat districts and 1 5-seat district. Each congressional seat still represents approximately 692,000 people, but with a fair voting system, representation is far more likely to reflect the political opinion and demographic makeup of the state. So in a 3-seat district, like-minded voters are assured of a representative if they consist of at least 25% of the electorate. While in a 5-seat district, like-minded voters are assured of a representative if they consist of at least 16.67% of the electorate. So the thought is that instead of distributing one from the 14th, one from the 1st, one from the 2nd, we would instead send 5 from the 4th, 3 from the 1st, 3 from the 2nd, and 3 from the 3rd. So I'm really curious to hear y'all's thoughts on that and what you think about the current district lines in our state. Yes, Adam.
Some of that comes from a paper I wrote. I have a question. In the United States, you're used to pick a person, right? You have a list, you pick one person for Congress. Can you imagine having to pick 4 people? How many people have voted in it? A lot of you, all right, so a bunch of you voted, all right. So, what's your name? Daniel, what did you vote in 2020? So you voted for Congress. You're in the 6th congressional district. Hold on. You just vote for one person. Did you think about voting for 3 or 4 and getting a much longer list? Okay.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you pay any attention to the primary debates for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, 2016, 2020? No, not at all. Okay, so thinking we had, for the Democrats, for example, so we had some establishment candidates that are just very middle of the road. I'm a regular Democrat, Joe Biden, right? We also had some people that were like medium to high left, for example, Elizabeth Warren. And then we had others that were on the slightly more conservative side of Democratic. Who might be? Had the SNL had him with the sippy cup. It's rich.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
We got this.
Silicon Valley.
Yeah,
And John Yang.
not Yang. Andrew Yang. We'll go with Andrew Yang. He was like a regular guy. So I found things that I liked about all three candidates.
It's Bloomberg.
Bloomberg, yes,
Really, really rich. Really rich.
really, really, really rich. Very like middle of the road chap. I found things that I liked from all three candidates, and I wanted all three of them to represent me effectively. I felt like all of them could at different points, and I respected all of them. I feel the same way about a lot of Republicans running right now. It would be wonderful to give the opportunity to have genuine democratic debate again in Congress and to send multiple people that we all feel can represent our interests effectively, as opposed to putting all of that burden on one.
See, the reason Congress passed this law, they said it's too complicated. That's what they said in 1967. Alabama, which decided that they could keep racially gerrymandering. It's Alabama. By doing this, so they had multiple districts, and they did this. I mean, these super districts that had a large number of whites in them, they cracked black, and the coach said you can't do it. And the argument has been for years by political scientists, you as a voter, are not capable of picking more than one person. Have you ever voted for something? I mean, I don't care what it's for. It could be for All-Stars, for Major League.
Fantasy football.
Yeah, and you go, that's what you pick multiple people. Doesn't it?
I certainly do. I think y'all are smart. And I think that if politicians and candidates were required to tell you without a party label what their ideology is and how they would represent you, it would be a lot easier to understand.
Before you dismiss this,
So they gotta argue against the government.
it's not against the government, it's just different ways. Look, the laws allow different ways to solve something, right?
And I would argue this isn't going great so far. The single member district, I think, could really be improved.
We just, and by the way, we have multi-member districts in other states, no active state legislatures or
The city of New York had to do it to break up, yeah.
They do this in city, the city council.
Chicago did it too for their city council.
They do that if you elect more than one person. So you could have, let me make the argument this way.
Please, please.
And if you live in Cobb County, all right, so let's go.
Sparta? Okay.
Look, now there are students in Asian government. It's divided into 3 special districts. There's one in South Cobb County. South Cobb County is overwhelmingly non-black. It's mostly black. And the state legislature, going back when Democrats controlled it, they connected it with South Fulton, Douglasville, and South Fulton, Douglasville, and Clayton County. The one question runs up the middle of Cobb County. It starts in Buckhead, where the money is, and goes all the way Cherokee County, especially country clubs there. And it goes along, omitting like all the apartments of people who live along the interstate. Then there's the 6th district where I live, which stretches from very end, the other end of it, down to Johns Creek. Another end, the White County line.
It's like 100 miles.
Yeah, it seems like it, especially if you drive it. Now, that district was originally meant to have, when they drilled it 10 years ago, it was overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly people from the South, and overwhelmingly wealthy. How many of you came to this area, to Georgia, in the last 5 years? Yeah. And people came from all over the world, all over the United States. The media says,
Tagging in with you then?
the media says that what's happened to 6th district is you had all these people who moved here who are not white.
Sure.
That's partially true. It's also that people who are white but come from other parts of the country where there are Democrats. All these people relocated from, how many of you from like California? Yeah? Anybody from California? See, in California, they're basically one party. It's called Blue, Democrats. Those people come to Georgia years ago. So that's one of the things that's going on here. So it's not just that. It's, yes, it's more diverse. It's also people from all over. How many of you were not born in Georgia?
majority.
Well, I thought that was just us. No, we're the outsiders. But no, see, that's one of the reasons George is changing. All of you came here. And you have a different politics. I like it. Let's tell maybe you should go for two. Super districts is, when I proposed this solution in 2014, I was ridiculed.
I'm so embarrassed that I didn't cite you.
No, it's way back. Fair vote never cited me. I've been arguing with it. Cite me. But they didn't. So this is just great. I'm glad we got an audience. Maybe you listen to an old idea.
But it's a great idea, and other countries do this with great success. This is exclusively how Israel conducts its elections, and it works really well.
I have a question. So
Yeah.
I just like want to get this clear.
Yeah.
Like, so basically, what we're trying to fix is that there are still like so basically like mixed parts so that just makes sense, you know, so that one way that.
Yeah, Cobb County's in 3 pieces.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So that makes more sense. So you have
Yeah, we have, it'd be more than Cobb County. It would be Cobb County, maybe part of Fulton, part of Cherokee, Douglas, some of the others, but just that area. Go back to, go back to state line. And so we'd have a super district. And, no, to the actual current districts.
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, so it would not just be the 6th. You could have a district that's like the 6th, the 11th, the 7th, let's say, for example. And then you'd say, all right, you pick 3. The problem is, and this is when they've actually done this, New York City, people just vote for 1. So if you're the most popular person, you're probably going to win a seat. So we've done this. But those of you who voted, it's this kind of very sterile thing. You walk in. In fact, we actually have this building as precincts some years. Oh, yeah. And we're talking political science nerds here. We like,
It's exciting.
so, this is where we have a precinct.
Yes, this is where it happens.
And my precinct has been moved 4 times in the last 5 years. Yeah, well, because it was in a church, and then the church had a roof failure, to put it mildly. The roof fell in. And then after a tornado kind of thing, it fell in. So then they moved us around. It's like, well, we got to put it somewhere else. I'm in Elizabeth 3, which is the actual name of a precinct. They have names. Each one of you lives in a little precinct. How many of you live in Gwinnett County? All right. That's a couple of districts. That's the 7 and the 4. And they were totally gerrymandered 11 years ago when Gwinnett was radically different, when it was an overwhelmingly white suburban county. It is now one of the most diverse places in the country. So, some of you went to high school in Gwinnett, right? Which high schools? Duluth, North, Wales, Central, which you showed Lawrence. It's got so diverse. And so the Republicans used to absolutely hold the 7th district. 4th was gerrymandered, had all the Democrats in the air. It was packed. And the 7th was cracked. Because when it was changed. You know, people, I know this is all seeming abstract. You're the future. Yeah, white hair, full on 90 rain. But the funny thing is, it's up to you. Try on different things. Most Georgians, by and large, to young Georgians, well, they may lean Democrats, they like some Democrats, they like some Republicans. If you have these super districts, you could vote for one of each, whatever you like.
And you could feel legitimately represented, or at least hear the kind of debates that you're having with your neighbors and colleagues on the congressional floor. So at least hearing that your side is represented as well as your neighbors. That just feels better to me.
So are you saying like in like a super district, you vote for 25% majority?
Yes. So it is.
It's like a little thing. How do you win? You have 3 seats. You can do it. You can either have the way Georgia did it originally was you would have post 1, post 2, post 3. run for each of the three. And whoever got the most in post one, won that one, post two, won that one, post three.
So in other words, like they could, a bunch of Democrats can vote for, run for one, post and then a bunch of Republicans.
Why don't they just flip it? Or you guys know they had the vote in California to recall the governor. He won, so they didn't do it. Then they just have this list of like, I don't know, 40, 50 people. And what they would just do is pick the top three on that list. That's another way of doing it. That's less confusing. Pick your top three. And there are debates that we engage in as political scientists, like what works better. Here's the problem. Most of you are used to, I vote for one person for one seat. I'm voting for Dr. Brianna. That's it. You know, he's right. And so people don't think about that. It takes a mind change. I didn't realize the goal.
That is so weird. Yeah.
It didn't work. When I presented this, I was ridiculous in the Southern.
Was it really?
It was a Southern College. Yeah. Okay, we'll get into this later. Yeah, I proposed this, and I didn't get cited much. They stopped citing me years ago. I don't think anybody cared.
Well, I care.
And this is something, if you could change, if you can rethink, this is not illegal. There are plenty of ways to do this. This has been done before. This is the way they chose members to the first Congress. Remember James Madison? Yeah. James Madison was selected as a Congress member in the great state of Virginia, the man who birthed, basically, the Bill of Rights. He was elected because what they said is, we have X number, it was 10, pick 10. Now, granted, we'll talk about this later. Those who could vote were white males over 21 who owned property. And that would fit a lot of us here. A lot of you aren't even 21. You know, and so that's part of the issue. But James Madison didn't finish first. He finished down on the list. He still got selected. Top left.
You know what? A point that you brought up that I think is so interesting and why this is such a hot button for me is that it's assumed by the political elite that voters are incapable of selecting more than one representative. I question that. I really do. It goes back to those foundational conversations. How many of you have taken intro to American government? Yeah, we've heard those stories, right? About kind of like fear of the unwashed masses versus thinking maybe that citizens are like relatively well informed. I think that we have the capacity to be highly informed.
That we, especially, I was amazed at me. I'll need student to walk, you know, to look up something. Somebody gets on their phone, they got exactly what we need in class.
Yep.
I know this may sound like it, but it used to be, oh, we'll do that next time I go to the library. Last time I couldn't remember questions. But what we're talking about here is just a slightly different way to do this. Look, how long did it take most of you, those of you who voted, how long, just shout it, how long did it take you to actually vote cast the ballot?
10 minutes.
Now, I had to wait in line, especially in the runoff. I was out in self-freezing weather in January in the runoff, because I wanted to vote early, and that took me, I realized when I walked in, I had two people to pick, the Senate, and the actual voting process was about 47 seconds. But I think that we're capable as a society, and especially all of you as students, do this differently so it's more. It doesn't matter what. When I started here, a long time ago, the Democrats ran this state, and they gerrymandered everything for the Democrats. And the Republicans came in and they did it. This just keeps going. It's a vicious cycle.
I want to say yes. I think about our civic education and the ways that we learn how our government works, and by extension, of course, how our elections work. I know when I was in kindergarten, it was 2000, and so we had a mock election at my elementary school for Bush v. Gore. Did y'all do like mock elections when you were little? Right, and so you got your little ballot, and everyone gave their campaign speeches, and then you voted for one of the two people. How simple would it be to just alter our civic education a tiny bit and train ourselves to be more thoughtful about that? To only, a few more candidates not a wild amount of information, but providing more opportunity for equal representation.
Also, more young people can get in. That's
Yeah.
part of this.
And money.
She made a great point. She said, unfortunately, the people who draw the maps in their constituents. The politicians, I don't know what party. Name calling. Every time I let anybody vote against me, I can vote for my students in here. So it's when they, the only time people vote against me is when it's time to evaluate the professor. I'm repressive. No, here's the thing. What I try and do, and what Professor Hanson-Figeroa, I'm trying to speak truth to power.
To even give you an
Anybody
opportunity.
will listen to us, please.
No, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So the purpose of me bringing up redrawing Georgia into super districts is exclusively just to point out that there's another way to do this. And that if we all in this room decided to gather 15 of our comrades and be like, hey, you know what's a great idea is to tell everyone we know about super districts. This would make it a more effective democracy. People would feel more represented. People would want to participate. The corruption and money out of politics would be limited significantly.
That's the problem.
Not at all.
We're supposed to be voting for.
27 years ago, I wasn't the first person to do this. It's 27 years ago. I said this and people, they didn't even be nice. You know, they just looked at me. I just, yeah, I told this will never happen. And they did some fundamental statistics to show that it's more fair. But this is something we all have right now. Some of you I know can't vote because you're not 18 or you're not U.S. citizens. But, I mean, you're heading that direction. You can vote. You can change. Do you ever wonder why politics looks like me? A bunch of middle-aged white guys. They're lawyers. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a political scientist. So don't take that one out.
They could be entrepreneurs too.
Yeah, they're entrepreneurs too, but it's changing. We, the people. Go on. Go on, please. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Does anyone have any questions? Yes. So they have to be.
That has happened.
It is, but they still have to get that 25%.
Yeah, see, that's the issue. That's why you set a threshold. Give you an example. A city in California tried this. They had super districts for city council instead of just small districts. They would expand their city council because the city was becoming, as a consultant, so I won't tell you what it is, but it was becoming more diverse. So that's what they did. Here's the problem. In one district, we'll call it District A, one person, let's say, got 1,500 votes. The next highest person got 27, and the next highest person got 25. And they're supposed to have 3. That's crazy. That's crazy. You can't have one person. So one person was really popular.
Right.
And then the other candidates, and there were much more, got much less. I'm making it extreme. So what they had to do, they had to say, all right, pick one. You have to get at least 25%. The other 2, no. So they had to run again. Yeah. They had to run again. I got called in on this because my brother's a lawyer in Georgia. He said, hey, talk to my brother. They had to redo it. And they had to redo it and then have a threshold number. It's cost a lot of money. And do you think anybody showed up the second time they did it?
Oh my gosh, no.
No, the first time was November. That's a normal voting time, right? It's Halloween, then it's time to do something really scary called up. And then This ended up being in January. February. By that time, nobody cared.
Unless it's a super high interest campaign.
And then they actually, instead of, let's say, 6,000 votes, whatever, actually they got about, get about 4. So, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. You have to have.
To prevent that.
And they didn't even think about it in the city. They hadn't thought about it, and so they had this horrible problem. And then they ran it again, and the 2 people came in second and third anyway, won. Nobody else wanted to contest it.
Just embarrassing though, I suppose, for those
And
other
expensive.
candidates. And expensive, an embarrassing, expensive situation. Any other thought? Yes.
It's used locally. Some cities do it with bigger districts. Chicago kind of do. It doesn't get anywhere in Congress because members of the House, they say, I'm a single member district. I just want my district. It's very hard to convince members of the House. Change. Once you get there, I want to have small town. Still, these people, we're we the people, right? They're like, well, you chose me.
I want to keep my job. I want to keep my job just like how it is with all of my amazing benefits, just like how it is. I want everything to stay exactly the same. I need to achieve re-election so that I can continue my political career. Constitution Day, thoughts on the Constitution?
We aren't changing the Constitution, by the way. The Constitution of the United States says absolutely nothing about that. As, okay? What's it say? You have X number of seats per state, and the state legislature therein decides how those people are elected. That's it. We're not talking about overthrowing anything. We're just talking about change.
A small alteration to our pre-existing democratic system that would massively increase its representativeness.
See, one of the big things, many of you know who AOC is.
Sure.
One of the real reasons she's young and stuff, that's because the way Congress works, it's set up to keep young people out.
Or down, even if they get in. Yeah.
If they get down, they get out the next time somebody with money takes them out. And for young people in Congress who have raised this issue, she actually has. She's in a really good district situation.
Yeah, she's not moving anytime soon.
Yeah, she's not losing, so she's good, but there have been a number of young people who've been knocked off. Because, and this is one of the reasons. I know a lot of you have to get off. Any more, couple more questions, and then I'll have you guys sign in. I know you all have to sign in. That's a big deal. I'm going to ask you when you sign in, clipboard, bring your name, I need your Hanson number, and the class, the professor you went through. Some of you from Arch Kelly's class, right? Just write Kelly. Just write Stone. Just write whoever it is. Any more questions, please? Sorry, I mean, you start with it's great to see an idea live.
Yeah.
And
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. I really appreciate it. It was great to talk with you all.
Yeah, thank you. And here's the sign in. And please do that.